plan to accelerate Africa's push for a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council. Ladies and gentlemen, our esteemed candidates, the first to answer this round of questions will be His Excellency Raila Amolo Odinga. You have 4 minutes, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. Well, silencing the guns on the continent. As you know that in 2013, the EU met and passed a resolution to silence the guns by 2020. We are today in 2024, and the guns are not silent. They're very loud, roaring all over the continent. The issue is we need to address the causative factors of these conflicts. There are some which are conflict caused by poverty or deprivation. Some of them by conflict within the society, again, things like ethnicity and so on. Some of them are externally influenced or promoted. Some are religious and so on. So there's not a common factor. But what you need to do is to address the causative factors which could translate into these conflicts throughout the continent. And this is what I will do myself. First, as you know that our African countries are not at the same levels of development. Those which are more developed, like for example, in terms of governance, there are some areas where you have got exclusions of people, and as a result of this, there's some people move to use other means. We need to find a way of creating an environment of dialogue within our societies so that we can be able to prevent these differences, conflict ending up into violent confrontation between the various groups. We don't need to put a time span, but I'm sure that it is possible to end these conflicts and stop the guns by 2035, in my view. The other one is the issue of Africa's representation on the Security Council. This is something that has been long overdue. As you know, that the UN was formed at a time when most parts of Africa were colonies. And that's why the UN structure as today does not deal with the realities of the world today. And the situation where you have 5 countries sitting in the Security Council with veto powers, and Africa is not represented, a continent with 1.4 billion people, is not tenable and it's not accessible. And that's why I'm not going to talk about Africa's representation, but we're going to insist that Africa must get 2 permanent seats in the UN Security Council. This is only fair, because we are a continent of 55 sovereign nations. We cannot be excluded when Europe has got 3 permanent representations on the Security Council. Permanent representation with the veto powers is a must for Africa. And this I'm going to insist when I'm elected. If the heads of state of Africa sees fit that I should lead this, I will work together with all the leadership of the continent to ensure that the continent gets a fair treatment on the international scene.
Thank you so much, Excellency. Candidate from...
Thank you. Well, I mentioned earlier on about the inter-African trade, which today stands just at 15%. Inter-European trade, on the other hand, stands at 70%. Inter-Asian trade stands at 60%. Africa trades more with the external world than with itself, wasting a lot of resources. Now, how did Europeans come from behind and leapfrog and overtake Africa? That is something that we need to ask ourselves. But here we need to now look forward to see how we can be able to make use of this huge domestic market that we have. We have a population of 1.4 billion people. And that is what has helped China. China did two things. One was to train the younger generation, the youth, so that they had a very highly skilled manpower. And when they liberalized their economy, the manufacturing unit in the West rushed to China. If you go to China, for example, take the automobile, the Ford, the Jeep, the BMW, the Mercedes, the Toyota, the Nissan, they're all there in China. And because there was cheap, highly skilled, cheap labor, secondly, cheap raw material. The raw materials which they were actually getting originally from Africa. And that is how China has managed to develop a 600 million people middle class. Africa can be able to fill the gap which is being left down there by China by actually coming together and opening up. So we need to come together as Africa and create an African market which will be able to attract investors to come to our continent. Africa is the youngest continent in terms of population. 70% of our population is below the age of 35. That is a big bonus. It can be a bonus or it can be a curse. If the youth are not empowered, given requisite knowledge and skills, they become a drug to society, drunkards, drug addicts, and criminals. But empowered, they become a real source for wealth creation. It is a pity today that many African youths drown in the Mediterranean trying to seek greener pastures in Europe because you have not created conditions that can retain them here. Now we are saying that we want to create a situation where every African youth must be connected to the internet and using the artificial intelligence and information technology, we can be able to give this youth opportunity to work anywhere in the world when they're staying here on the continent. This is something that we are going to address, empowerment of the African youth and together with the African woman, so that we create a workforce that will be helped in terms of wealth creation on the continent. This will enable Africa to leapfrog and to catch up with the rest of the world. I'm saying that I want to be a vehicle to be used to help Africa to get there. We will work together with all the leadership in the continent so that Africa moves.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And now I yield the microphone to you, Excellency Raila Odinga. 4 minutes, sir.
Well, we know where we are as African Union, and that's why the heads of state came up with that committee on reforms, which was headed by former president, current Rwanda President Kagame. The chairmanship has now been passed over to Honorable William Ruto, President of Kenya. I have had long discussions with President Kagame when he was chairing that committee, because I was working as a high representative of the AU on issues of infrastructure. And I know the kind of frustrations that you feel working that way. I know that 93% of the resolutions that are passed by the heads of state at the assembly are never implemented. Now, there's some of them are resolutions which were probably not necessary. Some of them are not implementable, but majority of them are just not implemented. Some have to do with the structure and management of the AU at the headquarters. I'm not trying to pass any judgment here because I know that Mr. Paki has worked very hard to try to make the organization move forward. The other one has been the issue of funding, which has been a major challenge, and look at other alternative sources of funding. When I was there as high rep on infrastructure development, we came up with a proposal to set up an infrastructure fund for Africa, and using the African resources, because many of African countries have got a lot of money in sovereign funds, from which the AU can actually borrow without having to pay so much high interest. And this will help AU actually to spearhead the process of constructing some of these infrastructures. I mentioned the Trans-African Railway network, Lagos to Cairo, the high speed. Then you have got Beira in Mozambique to Lobito in Angola and Walvis Bay in Namibia. Then you have got the Lapset, which will come from Lamu in Kenya, running through South Sudan, Central Africa to Caribbean Cameroon to create a land bridge that opens the interior of Africa and gives these landlocked countries in the continent access to the sea. So some of these are possible, but we need to think out of the box and ensure that most of these reforms which are being proposed are implemented. We were talking about energy, which is a very major issue. And we have got the Grand Inga in the Congo, which can actually power the entire continent with power pools, southern power pool, eastern power pool, central, western, and northern power pool. That will help us to lower the cost of energy in the continent. That would be a revolutionary change on the continent. Then you've got the connectivity, fiber optic connectivity, open skies, opening up the skies for movement of people, and then visas. To do visas are a big issue. Many African businessmen cannot travel across the continent because they don't have visas.
Excellency, I'm really sorry to interrupt you.
But
Les 4 minutes se sont écoulées. Nous allons maintenant suivre.
Candidates, you each have 2 minutes to share your closing remarks, or better still, your last words. We will start this round with His Excellency Raila Odinga.
Thank you. I am delighted to have had the opportunity to address our people of Africa. And as I've said, I am ready to work for Africa. There are reforms that will be necessary so that AU can work more effectively. One of these reforms will be financial reforms, so that we are able to bring in the African private sector into the funding. I mentioned also the issue of sovereign funds that we can use. We can create a fund that will enable AU to do all its money work. Then there's issue of 0.2% of the duty, which only 17 countries are remitting. I will work to ensure that all the countries actually pay their dues to the Union. This is what happens in the European Union, and that's why European Union is able to even fund African Union. It's a shame. We can be able to fund this organization out of our own resources on the continent, and this is what I'm going to try to do. And I said that I am ready on day one when I'm appointed. I will not need any kind of induction. I'm ready to work for the continent, and I will offer my best. The days of Africa have come. The African lion will begin to roar and tell its Asian tiger counterpart and the European bear and the American jaguar that this is going to be Africa's millennium, the 2000.
Dear candidate, I'm
21.
really sorry to interrupt you once again, but
It's
these are the
African-
rules of the debate.
African year.
Nous allons maintenant, mesdames et